You can see there the ribs where the earthquake happened and dropped all the earth away from the side of the ark. You can see how distinct that formation is compared to the rest of the landscape around it. Those are sheep on the ark, which gives you an idea of how large it is. Looking at the port side or the left side of the boat. The black rocks in the foreground are what we think are deck timbers that supported the deck. And you can see there's a natural water flow as the ark has decayed there in the center, but you're looking at the left-hand side of the boat, the port side. This is what we think is another one of the deck timbers. That's an up-close shot. There's another deck support timber, all fossilized, petrified. Okay, this is one of the best shots we have of the side of the boat, the timbers sticking up. You can see the light between them. This is the side of the boat. Those are part of the petrified wood that was the side of the boat. While we were there, we found this. It's a petrified rivet. All around the side is a washer. What they did is run the iron spike through the wood, and then they put the washer over it. They melted the end of it, and then they hit it with some kind of a semi-round object, and they formed this petrified rivet. Let's take a little closer look at it here.
If you ordered them from a catalog or something, and in the case of Noah's Ark here, it's about 45 to 4,700 years of age, and so we can't expect everything to look like it just came out of the woodwork shop. Now, for years, there was a story associated with St. Jacob's Monastery over on the Aridal, we call it, our large or greater Ararat, and that was that an outcropping of stone that these people had gone up and dressed with hammers and chisel, and from a distance, the distance, by the way, of their monastery, it looked a good deal like the end of a boat sticking out of the mountain. However, it was over 250 feet high. Noah's Ark's only 51 feet high. And along with these stories was a command of God through St. Jacob that nobody under any circumstances was to climb the mountain. That way it kept people from going up and finding out that they had dressed this cliff and that they were getting snookered. St. Jacob was supposed to have received a large timber from Noah's Ark from Gabriel himself, and from about 300 AD until 1848, when an earthquake and an eruption on the mountain totally wiped out St. Jacob's Monastery and the village of Ohura. This was the story that kept people off the mountain, kept from looking for the remains of Noah's Ark. And by the way, they sold probably several large boatloads of this one timber that Gabriel gave St. Jacob. For some reason or the other, people don't think too seriously. After they make a long trip and somebody sells them something and tells them that came from Noah's Ark, they're not about to ask any questions. They want to be able to go home and say, this is from Noah's Ark. And so they had a thriving business over there. Now then, after that blew up, a lot of people started looking on that mountain. They quote Genesis, I believe it's 9, as saying the ark landed on the mountain of Ararat. In fact, it says it landed in the mountains, plural, of Urartu, which is the equivalent of saying it landed somewhere in the Rocky Mountains or in the Himalayan mountains. It does not designate one specific spot. Now then, down through history, there have been stories told about this site by Berosus of Babylon, quoted by Josephus, and of course there's been many other historians that alluded to the ark and its location. Now, one of the things that was characteristic of the site where the remains of the ark were to be found was that Amumam grew there. Now, this is in the story or legend of Utnapishtim, who was the Babylonian Noah, and Gilgamesh, who was the king that went to seek him out and to discover the secret of his so-called eternal life. And this Amumam is right here to my right. After a bit, we'll peel some of this and let you eat it. Now, it sticks your hand, but it tastes aromatic, tastes quite delicious, and shall we say, Montezuma's influence is not in it, so it's safe to munch on that. Now then, to get down to more serious business, this site was seen in an aerial survey in the 50s. It was taken from the U-2 aircraft that was shot down over Russia. Gary Francis Powers filmed this. They had a cover story that a Turkish pilot filmed it. That's not true. It was a NATO aerial survey, and it was to be compared with later surveys in order to determine if there had been any missiles or military sites developed in Russia and in this part of Turkey if the Russians overran it suddenly, which was one of the possibilities and still is. So maybe you want to polish up on your Russian just in case they do that while we're here. But anyway, some people came out to check out this site, and they had listened to all the stories about Noah's Ark being intact. And consequently, when they came here and saw this in the condition that it's in, which by the way is a lot more than you could normally expect, and it would not have survived in this condition if God hadn't arranged for it to have been buried, first of all in a lava flow, and then next in some mud flows that followed that. This fossilized the material and preserved a lot more of it than would have been preserved had that not happened. So they came and digged a few holes through what we know to be the gunnels, and they blasted a hole in the side of it back there. In that blast, they blew chunks out of several rib timbers. They blew a large section out of a keelson and went their way, saying that there was nothing of archaeological interest out here. Now then, these people were at least smarter than I am, and the fact that they did not do chemical analysis, metal detector scans, and that sort of thing, I believe to be providential. We're told in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10, that in the dispensation of fullness of times, God subdued all things unto himself through Christ Jesus. In Matthew, we're told that when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son. So the reason those people did not realize that this was the remains of Noah's Ark was not a lack of intelligence. It was simply not God's time. And so anyway, later in 1977, we came out, looked at the site based on this aerial survey, and we took samples out of the areas that they had blasted I did not have an excavation permit and could not have taken good samples had they not blasted these holes in there in 1960. So, as the Bible says, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. And the men that came out here loved the Lord. The ones in 60, and of course, I love the Lord, and so do you. Anyway, we were able to take these samples, and the results showed a very high iron content. Of course, this told me that ferromagnetic metal detectors would give us readings on this object. So we got one of those, went over it, found that all around this edge that you're looking at here on 9-foot centers, we got very strong metal readings. Now, to make sure that this wasn't something that, shall we say, didn't reflect the realities of a boat being under here, we did have an Army officer that dug into one of the big iron plates. We took a sample of that. It was 91+% ferric oxide or iron, and it was right on the side of a large rib timber. So we have found since that time that this boat is full of tons and tons of massive iron plates and petrified wood. And as this iron oxidized during the time that the wood was fossilizing, it was incorporated into the wood. So we're able to read the fossilized timbers by this metal detection system also. Then we took a radar, subsurface interface radar system that can penetrate in this type soil down to 70 feet. And this can be focused, much like your binoculars and your cameras. So we were able to look at strata by strata all the way down through this, get the location and size, and to some degree the material or the components of the large structures that remain of Noah's Ark. Now, we were able to do a wee bit of excavating, and right behind me here you see 2 deck support timbers, our deck timbers. Now, these, you will see another one, and it's only indicated by the difference in color of the site. This is one of the things that many people miss when they are investigating an ancient artifact. They expect too much, and consequently they miss seeing what is there. Now, there's a light colored lump up here. This is a vertical timber in the boat. Right behind this deck beam or deck timber is the end of another timber, and right to the right of it is yet another timber that was part of the massive railing that went around the boat. Right below these deck beams are deck support timbers that go down vertically and support this. Now, earlier on, exactly opposite to us, were the counterparts of these timbers. However, that has fallen into the gully and is lost. So we're hoping that we can do something rather quickly to stop the deterioration of the back end of what's left of the boat here. But as you progress around the side of this, at even distances, you find these darker spots on the bank. Each of those represent what's left of a timber, and the radar scan, of course, shows that timber under the dirt that, of course, you cannot see through yourself. So anyway, all around the perimeter of this boat on 9-foot centers are massive rib timbers. We were able, down in the lower part of the boat, to retrieve one of the deck planks. This was fossilized and in quite good state of survival. At this point in time, we have a plan lined up. Dr. Roberts here has talked with some people that have the money and the will to excavate this entire object, to cover it, preserve it in a manner that will be, shall we say, quite satisfactory, and to supply an airstrip down below so you don't have to ride the bus out here for 4 hours and end up with calluses or saddle sores. And if the Turkish government will cooperate, and I am hopeful that they will. Now then, back to the artifact itself. The high end up here, which is the bow of the boat, is aligned with the lava and mud flow in such a manner that that is quite well preserved. And it's there that we intend to begin the excavation, because it's well preserved and because we can shelter that and keep the rain and freezing and that sort of thing thawing from destroying the remains of the boat after it is exposed. If we chose to excavate in this area, then all of the water that would land on the upper end of this would flow into the excavation site and would end up, result in the destruction of anything that we found down here. Shows that there are chambers in here that have not collapsed. There's others that are filled with mud and debris. We have found in these chambers animal hair. We have found a petrified antler. Now I have all off, they are shed periodically and doesn't hurt the animal, they simply grow another one back. We have found fossilized animal droppings, which are referred to in scientific jargon as corpalites. So all of those things have been found here, plus pierced anchor stones of the appropriate size for a 515-foot boat. So there is overwhelming evidence that this is indeed the remains of Noah's Ark. Now these are also accompanied by inscriptions in the Sumerian script, in the Urartuan script, and in the Hurrite hieroglyphics. So all of these things say that this is Noah's Ark, and having been a student of archaeology for some time, as you can tell by the hair color I wear, this is more than is required to identify an object. There is no reason for anybody at this point in time, if they are informed about what is out here, to conclude or to say that this is not the remains of Noah's Ark.
As we're looking at the side of it, you can see the ribs and the way the water's flowed down. You tell that it's not just a natural formation. You can see rib indentations. Like right there. Right there's another one, discoloration. You can see the size of the boat as you look at the people there. This man in your screen is about to bend over and touch the ark with his left hand, and he's going to pick up a rock. And that's the exact place that I picked up the ark, or the piece of the ark that I brought back. You see here that the mud is kind of washed away from some of the keelson. Okay, Ron White just told me that all along this side, beginning right there, going down to there, about 18 feet wide, is the door of the ark. He said he could not get a reading on how tall the door was because he couldn't get an angle on his radar. He said, but that confirmed that that is the door.
We drilled in there several feet, struck an iron, or rather a brass bar on the way in. It did some awful things to my core drill and to me out on the end of it. But once we got into the chamber, we were able to rig up a scraping device on the end of a stick and reach in and bring out some stuff. As I was dragging this stuff out, apparently I left some in the tunnel. Later, I stuck enough mud in there and jammed it in to fill the back of the hole so it would look like it was a dead end. And Marinelle comes along, reaches in, and pulls out some stuff with an animal hair in it. Well, we took this home and kept it, videoed it, and all this sort of thing. And along comes Dr. Roberts and gets into this stuff, and I guess he probably found 25 animal hairs, one of which was bright red. So we don't know exactly what these hairs came off of, but it's very obvious that they're animal hairs, and they came out of this hole. Now then, at some point in this excavation, we would like to think that we can make a pathway or a walkway through the hollow part of the boat so that people can walk through and see this. Folks being what they are, however, we're going to have to use glass or something to separate the walkway from the remains of the boat so people can't reach out and help themselves, but that's one of the things I'm hoping to do in our excavation. Slick, the gunnel is right behind that, and if you flake this whole thing off right here, you could see some fairly well preserved gunnel right behind it, and when we start excavating, we will do some of that. But where it's quite parallel or level and flat, you're quite close to the quite flat along here. This is fossilized gunnel. Now, this stuff has not petrified to the extent that it is solid as the piece I have back home. Consequently, when it rains and that sort of thing, it erodes some of the actual structure away here, and that's why it's pitted and all this sort of thing. When we excavate, we'll be able to pull this section away from it, and then you'll be able to see a quite well preserved section of the hull of the boat. Now, as somebody just mentioned a minute ago, if we just come in here and dig the covering off of some of this fossilized material, the first winter it goes through, it'll destroy it. So we have got to cover it first and then excavate it. So that's why it's going to be so expensive. If we just came out and dug the dirt away, we could photograph some very impressive stuff, but that would be the kiss of death, and that is not what archaeologists are supposed to do. And we, of course, as Christians, are supposed to do everything decently and in order. So when we do archaeological digs, when we find pottery, we film it, document it, preserve it, and then we go on. We don't give it the blind dog in the meat house or the bull in the china closet treatment, because doing that will get you booted off of an archaeological site, and for good reason. These people don't know the Lord's coming. They think this stuff's going to be around for years, and we had better treat it like they want it treated, or we won't get to do the work we need to do to share this with people and witness to them about.
So that's Noah's Ark, and you can see very clearly from here, having looked at it up close, that it's a boat. And what they think happened is it actually landed someplace up in here. And then as the mud flows and rains came and snows, it eventually sifted down, came to rest right in there. If you look at the side of the boat, you can see the timbers, the ribs, the way they come up and hold it. You notice the different colorations. That'll help you to see the different rib timbers that stick up. What they think happened is the boat came down off of the mountain and would have gone right on down the valley, right on down here, and then finally broken up all down in there, it would have just been a bunch of pieces and all been lost. But as the boat came down off the mountain, it hit that rock right there, and that rock ran up through the side of it and kind of nailed it to the side of the mountain and held it there. And then in 1978, up to that point, it was buried in mud, and there was an earthquake in December of 1978 that dropped the mud from around it, and what helps us to see it so clearly today that it is a boat. And they plan to come back hopefully this year and begin building a building around it to excavate it totally. And when they start washing some of that mud away, it's going to be quite obvious that that is a boat. This is one of the anchor stones from Noah's Ark. As we look closely, you can see the inscriptions. See, there's a cross, part of a cross that's broken in half. There's another cross. One. Let's see. Two. And you can see there's another larger cross there. And as we look at the other half behind us, this is the village of Eight. And if you follow the village of Eight right up, you'll see there's a little kind of a bowl-shaped area right there. If you look in the bottom of that, you'll see a tombstone. We're going to be seeing that here in a little bit. That is Noah's house right over there. That's where Noah lived. There is the village of Eight. Then 8 people that survived the flood. What's left
Noah's house.
of Noah's house?
Well, it's full of critters. There's a lizard in there, see him?
What's left of Noah's house after people came out and ransacked it looking for treasures.
We are at the site of what appears to have been Noah's home at some point after he left the ark. Right off in this area were 2 grave markers, and we have those on film at home. I took them in 1977. Now, we made a little booklet and made sketches of all these things. And one of the people, a real good Christian, and if you didn't believe it, just ask him. Have you met those kind of folks? When I meet them anymore, they don't get anything. But at that time, I was rather naive, so I gave him one of these books. Well, I was going to bring the group out here in 1984 and show them this. We got down to another village where there was some old millstones, and I showed them that first. While I was showing them that, I saw this guy off with my sketch of the grave markers, showing them to one of the villagers to see if he knew where they were located. At that point in time, I decided that we didn't have time to get out here to see this place. But he persisted, and finally he found somebody that knew where this was, paid them $400 to dig up Mrs. Noah's grave. And again, I have the description of the people that interrogated the guy that dug it up, and some of the folks that saw it as it migrated westward and was eventually sold for over $100 million on the black market in Istanbul. Now that's a pretty impressive sum of money for jewelry. I was told that she had a head dressing of some sort that was made of gold, necklaces, bracelets, but the main thing that she had was some sort of a large bodice that was solid gold and encrusted with many gemstones. And as it turns out, like I said up on the mountain, the only way you're going to get to see that is if you get to heaven, and I assume we'll get a replay of all of this. but they dug this grave up, and if you want to walk over and look, you'll see it's quite a long grave. There was a sarcophagus appeared in Ankara about that time that was 18 feet in length. And so anyway, it appears that they missed Noah's grave, which is in this area. And as you see, we have our guests back with us again, watching to see what we might show interest in. So we're not going to show interest in anything they can carry off and sell to somebody. But when we get started excavating out here, one of the things I hope to do is just come back and excavate this grave of Noah. I doubt seriously that he will have the type jewelry that was on his wife, but at least we'll get to see what size he was and perhaps see something from his period of time that might have been buried with him. Now, when they apparently got word back that this thing had sold for that much money, they came out here and systematically destroyed this building. When I first saw it in 1977, it was pretty much intact except for the roof. And ancient buildings usually have lost their roofs if somebody hadn't lived in them recently. Now then, if you want to go with us up to this large stone right in the saddle of the valley there, that appears to have been an altar. And from that point you can see the system of fences here that appears to have been a system of corrals and pens. And we were told that Noah became a husbandman, and of course there's cattle husbandry, and it's specifically mentioned that he planted some grapes or a vineyard.
Ron thinks maybe an altar, possibly the altar that Noah. And this is what we think is Noah's altar. Good possibility anyway. You can see the beautiful valley. And down in the valley, past the altar, you can see where the people are still down there looking at what we think was Noah's house. And you can look and see that there's some kind of a fencing system where he used to keep his animals, where he raised part of them, perhaps for his food. Now I'm at a higher point, and as we look back over towards the west, right over there is where we found, or we just looked at the anchor stone. And then as we back up and come back down towards the east of the valley, see there's the village of 8. And as we look real close, you can see there's, of course, Noah's house, and you can see the rows of stone fences that we think he kept some of the animals in. Probably for his cattle, to feed his family. You can see the stone standing up. A person might say, how can they move such large heavy stones? Well, we're going to go down and look at Noah's wife's grave, or what's left of it, just a hole in the ground. And he says that is perhaps 18 feet in length. So they were big people back then. That fence was not too hard for him to build, as would compared to us today. And there's the rock that we think Noah did his sacrificing on. And I got up close and asked myself, why would he choose that rock? And as I looked at it real close, you can see that there's kind of an indentation.
There's enough room for a person to get up there and to have put wood and place the animal and perform the sacrifice. If I were going to do that, that would probably be the place I would do it in the area. Another reason is because of the size and also the location. He can come up here and people can see the sacrifice from miles around if that might be important to him at that time.
Ron is about to tell us where he thinks Noah did his sacrificing, and specifically where he killed the animal, and then he spun it around and they drained the blood off, and then how he would lead it over to the altar. And what you can't see is there's a fence off to the back behind us to the right, back behind us to the left, a fence made of rocks.
Led the animal up here, probably turned it around rather than kill it and then have to turn it around. And then somebody came up and did whatever they did to it, render it unconscious. I assume they hit it with some sort of a mallet or maul or something. That being the more humane manner of, terminating an animal's life. And while it was unconscious, they would slit its throat and drain the blood. Yeah. So this was for big animals.
And it perhaps was a foothold to someone to get up and stand and talk to people, perhaps hold their worship services. And this area here is just a natural amphitheater. We can hear people talk from all around. And then what they think happened is this is the rock where the sacrifices were sacrificed from. I think that this area here perhaps was once a kind of a little corral that held the animals. You can see the rocks there. Kind of a natural corral. And then the animal was brought right up here. Natural place to sacrifice the animal. And then it was taken up there, or I should say a natural place to kill the animal. Then taken up there for the sacrifice. And then they held their worship service right here in this natural amphitheater. And as you listen, you can hear people talk from all over. It just picks up sound every place. Noah's wife's grave, before grave robbers robbed it and got the gold and jewels out of it. And the only thing that we have now that points to that it was a grave at all is a rock over here that has a cross on it. Show them where the cross is. See the cross there. Show one more time. See, there was a cross on that rock. There's another one of the anchor stones. You can see there where the rope went into it. And you can see the crosses there on it, representing the 8 that survived the flood.
Sark, I'll point out a few things to you here that once you notice them, shall we say, will tend to make good sense. This stone weighs several tons, and you'll notice the hole is affixed right near the top. A stone of this weight suspended with just that small portion of itself, when suspended in open air, would snap off. In water, there's a considerable amount of buoyancy, which would make this thing work in water, but not out in the open air. So that way we know that it was designed to be used in water. All right, now on here, originally there were 8 crosses, like on the other one you saw up there, except these are of a Crusader style. You'll notice that some of this material has been knocked off and that there's some crosses in here. This tells us these crosses were added later. And some of the design right here, for example, this one's been added later. The original 8 crosses here are similar to the ones up there, except again, these are Crusader and not Byzantine like the other. But the most significant thing about this anchor stone to me is these symbols right here. This is Nimrod's symbol when he was alive. Now, if you remember in the Bible, he said that he would make a pathway to heaven. This is what the builders of the Tower of Babel said. And the cities that he built have these symbols on the bricks. He claimed that the ark was his doing, and that man was spared by his doing, in spite of God's intention to destroy all life on the planet. So this is the symbol of the ark below, and the symbol of his pathway to heaven, the vertical shaft on here. The horizontal shaft represents heaven. So this is Nimrod's promise, and there is probably some pretty good reason to believe that the Tower of Babel is a bit more than a pile of burnt brick and tar. However, we haven't found that yet, so I'm just saying God's response to what they were doing seemed a little bit inappropriate for just a ceramic tower. Now then, after Nimrod died, this was moved to the top, symbolizing that he had gone to heaven, and of course its name today is the Egyptian Ankh, A-N-K. But Osiris that was worshipped in Egypt is none other than Nimrod. And Isis was Semiramis, and Horus, of course, was Tammuz. And all through the pagan world, they worshiped these people, their ancestors. And so anyway, there's 3 of these symbols on here showing the relationship to Nimrod. There's one more, and with the sun in my eyes, I can't see it. Okay, now, thank you. This hole here is 7 inches in diameter. The hole on the other side is 5 inches in diameter. In the center, we have a 9-inch diameter area, and we have a ridge in there that's designed to fit in the knot of a rope. So, if you pull the rope through, tied your knot in it, and pulled it back through and placed it just right, according to this groove that's in here, and you can get up on this and take a look if you want to. Then when the water swelled the cord up, it would fill this very snugly, and you would have no chafing. So it's quite an ingenious method of preventing your rope from wearing in two in the violence of the flood. There and video that while we still have some sunshine. We have one more place to go after we get through in the village here, and that's what appears to be petrified bark, which we think might possibly be a part of the covering of the ark that Nimrod took off, because bark makes an excellent covering. It's no good for the bottom of a craft, but if it's placed on the top, it's very waterproof and does not absorb water, so it's choice material for that.
Huh.
That thing is hollow?
Somebody was good with whatever's good.
This has a good sound
on here. This appears to be bark. Okay?
Wow.
From an evergreen type tree. That's what it appears to be. Now, this one has 8 crosses on it, but due to the type of material it is, it's quite difficult to see them. This is the large cross here, and comes across this way. And here's a cross right here. And I can't even find the rest of them. Here's a cross here.
There's one over here.
Oh yeah. Here's one here. There's another one right in here. And then here's one right here. And there's another one around here someplace. But this apparently was standing up at one point in time, and the road passed right by behind you here. Now, what I have observed is there are more of these over through the field, but it's quite a hike, and it would be dark before we could get finished. So if y'all want to see them, we can do it tomorrow. There's 2, 3 more of these, I believe, back through there. But it looks as though one of these was set up at each roadway going into this village with the 8 crosses, and that is how come it was referred to as the village of the 8. That's how it was identified, by these 8 crosses on each of the roads coming into the village.
Well, is that what that village is still called? The village of the
No.
8, or?
They have changed the name to allude to this artesian spring that's back here. Yeah. Since the earlier inhabitants left the area, the name was changed.
Are the other pieces this big that are over here?
Well, they vary in size. They're not all this big, but they do have the 8 crosses on them. Yeah, you need a rock. It doesn't work with your hands.
Ron, what can you say about the fact that as thick as it is, it's supposed to be just bark of a tree? Is this an indicator on the size of a tree, or?
It would be, and also the plane would indicate that it was a very large diameter tree.
We're going to look at it closer up later on today. He says just to the left of the light pole there, towards the ground, is a burned up sphinx. It looks kind of like a stump. Well, there it is. Sodom and Gomorrah, or what's left of it. One way that God deals with sin.
Collapse on you, yes. You can walk in there and fall into a hole through the ash, just like snow. Folks.
That is a brimstone, a ball of sulfur out of the hills of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Historians have doubted the existence of Sodom and Gomorrah. As is quite common, many people believe that the Bible is a collection of Hebrew legends and traditions. And so anyway, Sodom and Gomorrah were one of the things in particular that people questioned, because they had never been able to find any of the remains of these cities. Now in 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter and the 6th verse, it tells us that Sodom and Gomorrah were an ensample, or a visual evidence of what God does to the wicked. Ezekiel 28, it he says that Satan himself shall be reduced to ashes on the earth. Malachi 4 says that the righteous shall tread upon the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of their feet. And so back to 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter and the 6th verse, it says that they are an ensample, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Okay? Now then, there's some confusion on what eternal fire consists of. I believe personally that it's the principles in physics and chemistry. Everything has its flash point. If you raise it to that flash point, or you use a catalyst to lower its flash point, it will burn. That's an eternal principle. However, it only burns as long as there's something there to burn. Sodom and Gomorrah in the back of me is what is left of the city of Gomorrah. Now then, if you get home and look in your encyclopedia under brimstone or sulfur, and if you get a book on combustion, you'll find that any material that is burned in the presence of sulfur is heavier than the original material that was burned. So that is the explanation as to why most of this is still here. Deeper back into the area where there have been less bikes and four-wheelers and all of that sort of thing are some very remarkable double walls associated with Canaanite cities. Now in my hands here are evidence of burning fire and brimstone, and this is what the Bible says rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. There are millions, literally millions, of these little capsules, inside of which is sulfur. We have had this analyzed. It's 95% sulfur. The rest of the compounds are aluminum and some other metallic material that would make it burn hotter. Attempting to check the BTU developed by burning this material results in pitting of stainless steel. It cannot be checked. What happened when this sulfur burned and this rained down, it's very sticky. Wherever it hits, it sticks. And millions of these things falling on this city increased the temperature to several thousand degrees, and it burned the stone, the metal, everything. We have electronics with which we can find gold. We found gold deposits in several areas. Upon digging these up, we find that they are gold salts. They have vaporized from the extreme heat that they were subjected to and chemically combined with the material around them and are now gold salts. We have specimens of those. So anyway, as this material burned, it formed a liquid capsule about itself and eventually deprived itself of oxygen, which caused it to quit burning. Now we have found from small balls of sulfur or brimstone like you see in my right hand, and even smaller than this, to some that are very, very large, weighing many pounds. Now we have gone up into Oregon and other areas where there is volcanic activity. Sulfur is closely identified or associated with volcanic activity. However, it's not in pellets like this. It comes out in a powder, settles down in a little thin strata. And so anyway, I would like for each of you to take a sample of the ash. If you can find one of these, and again there are millions of them around here, then you can have it.
Okay, here's one of the sulfur balls that I'm going to pick up and bring home. And it kind of cracked and fell apart. Then there's another one over here I noticed. You can see someone walk right by it. There's another ball. And then I saw another one back over here.
Formed at 4, 5, 8,000 degrees temperatures. And since there's no evidence of any volcanic activity out here, we know this wasn't caused by a volcano. So whatever happened here and caused those chert nodules.
Okay, they're about to burn some sulfur, just to show you what it burns like.
What do you have there?
We're going to burn some sulfur.
What do you think? Okay, go.
Oh, the wind's blowing through my
Yeah, I smell it. I smell something. I'll see you in a second.
Here it goes.
Smell it. To get up close enough to smell it.
Oh! Stinky.
Give me a second. Smell-o-vision here.
It's hard to see the blue flame. You have to be in a dark place. But this burns at about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, pilgrims, which is very hot. And we're told that the fire of the Lord came down and burned the altar, the water, and the sacrifice on Mount Carmel, where Elijah was having a preach-off with the priests of Baal.
Good encapsulated.
What is
Yeah,
that
that's
thing you're
good.
holding there, Ron? What is that thing you're holding?
That's just a piece of wood, because
Piece
you
of wood,
can't
wood.
hold this thing here in your hand.
Yeah.
On the end?
You can see it's still in the form of brick. You can see there's some more of the wall there that retained its shape. Okay, now this is a close-up. If you look real close right there, you can see the outline of what were probably some bricks, not bricks the size we think of today, but probably 4 inches by 6 inches by 4 inches. You see some perhaps larger bricks, maybe 6 inches by 10, 12 inches wide. They use large stone to build buildings with there. Now you can see that this is made of ash, but you can see where the water has washed away the ash, which tells you what it was built on. It's just a bunch of rocks. So what it's standing on, the rocks, and what it's made of are two very different substances. This is all burned up. The city of sin. Pick this up. It's a sample of it. I picked it up from right there. To the wall. I can't take it with me. Their overview of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, with a little bit of imagination, you can see the outlines of buildings, and you can tell that was a city at one time. Houses, pillars, walls. This is the place of the skull. You can see the two eyes and the nose. Golgotha. There it is. The tomb they believe is Jesus' tomb. Written on the door, he is not here, for he is risen.
Okay, Ron is about to walk up and put his left hand on the door, or near the door of Jesus' tomb. He's going to put it next to an iron spike that was the thing that sealed the rolled round door in place, right there. That's what sealed Jesus' tomb.
Believe in which Jesus was buried. If this was the tomb in which he was buried, then this is not just the garden tomb, it's the garden of the resurrection. And we know now that Jesus is not here, he is risen. And those who believe know that he is present with them in their own hearts and lives always.
Amen.
And all the congregation said amen.
Amen.
Okay, what you're looking at there is where his feet were. This is the extra tomb over to the right that was never completed. There again, his feet and then his head are back up toward where I'm standing there. This is Jesus' tomb.
Feet 2 inches from that flange is that rusty iron stump of a spike.
Very close. Very close.
See, right there is where the rusty spike is that was sheared off as the angel rolled back the stone, where his left hand is there.
Okay, I mean, what happened?
Yeah,
What happened to the iron pin? Or
Are we going to go through?
it's there. See his finger?
oh, yeah, there it is. I'm sorry. I'm looking over the
Okay, that was the whole, that was the seal.
That was to keep it from rolling away.
Yourself here right here. Punch your head.
That's the spike.
Take your hand off the thing.
Notice the chisel marks right there is where they cut the 13.5-foot rock out. They chiseled it out from right there, and that's the reason it fit right back in that place. And then it rolled right down that tray sort of thing right there. Right there's the chisel marks where they cut it out. And right there is where they sealed it.
Sign or symbol of an anchor carved up on the face of the foot. And on the inside,
Ron says that the 13-foot 2-inch stone is within 200 foot of us, buried underneath the ground.
Ron is about to tell us how he discovered the Ark of the Covenant. And in preparation for this, we need to remember a couple of verses. First, Matthew 5:17 says, "Think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I'm not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill." So for Jesus to be our legal sacrifice, he had to fulfill the old Levitical law. In Leviticus 16:14, it tells of a very special sacrifice that is performed only once a year, and that's on the Day of Atonement. It's not a personal sacrifice. It is a sacrifice to wash the sins of a nation away, or a large group of people. They brought 2 goats to the high priest. They cast lots. 1 goat went free into the wilderness. That's where we get the term scapegoat from. The other goat, the blood of that goat, was taken into the Holy of Holies, and Leviticus 16:14 tells how the high priest would dip his finger in that blood and sprinkle it on the mercy seat, which is the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, 7 times. It says, "And he shall take the blood of the bullock and sprinkle it with his finger upon the mercy seat eastward. And before the mercy seat shall he sprinkle of the blood with his fingers 7 times. So for Jesus to be our legal sacrifice, his blood had to land on the Ark of the Covenant, the lid, the mercy seat, a minimum of 7 times. And that's where Ron is about to tell us he found the Ark of the Covenant underneath the center cross hole on Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. Now, the wailing in the background you hear is the Muslim call for prayer this afternoon at 4:30. We are in the garden of the Holy Sepulchre. The wailing will stop in a few moments, and then you can hear all about the discovery.
When you have something that is perfect, you can't do away with it, and you cannot change it. So that was not an option. So he and his son decided that the son who is equal with God. And if you read through Genesis there, the Hebrew points out very clearly that Christ is God. There's three of them, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. While we do not understand their nature completely, we do know that the Hebrew terms used to represent these beings involved in creation is plural. Okay, now then, he sent his Son down here to live a perfect life and then to die a very humiliating death. Now you recall when Nixon was caught doing some things that he resigned, and they said since he experienced such a humiliation and loss that was punishment enough. Okay, so anyway, we could say, well, Christ didn't do it just right and all of this, but he did, and God accepted it. And God does not cut corners, nor fudge, nor cheat. He does not have to. So Christ's sacrifice was exactly what was required to redeem every man, woman, and child that has ever lived on planet Earth. And I believe that when we are born, or when we first become a viable creature in the womb, our names are put in the book of life, and only we can take it out by our behavior. Okay? Now then, God did this for us. And folks, it was here that he did this, on this mountain. Abraham offered Isaac on Mount Moriah. The temple was here on Mount Moriah. And Christ gave his life here on Mount Moriah. Now, one day, I was walking along this escarpment with an archaeologist friend of mine. And those of you that know me, I am not given to salubrious soliloquies or sepulchral solicitudes. You know, I am hard-headed, hard-nosed, and I want to know the facts. And that's all I want to know. But as I was walking by, my left arm pointed to a dump under the wall or the escarpment, and my mouth said, that's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there. Well, I love the Israelis, but they're not overly generous, and I think our friend here will agree. But this man said, that's wonderful. We will let you excavate. We will give you a place to stay. We will give you all the help you need. We will provide your food, and we will do your laundry. How many times does an Israeli offer that to a goyim? Not often. So anyway, I was flabbergasted. I had not even thought about the Ark of the Covenant or Jeremiah's cave or none of that stuff, okay? So anyway, I said later I will maybe do this, but now I've got to go home. So I went home and I dug through history books and all of this. I found out that this city, at the time of the vanishing of the Ark of the Covenant and the other major furnishings of the first temple, when they vanished, the city was surrounded by a siege wall. 2 Kings 25th chapter, Nebuchadnezzar cast forts against the city round about, and the Hebrew simply means a siege wall. Titus did the same thing. Part of Titus's wall has survived to the north. They were built out of range of the catapults in the city. Catapult ology had not advanced since Nebuchadnezzar's time, and the Roman catapults, or that period of time, they had about the same range as the one in Nebuchadnezzar's time. So we can conclude that Nebuchadnezzar's wall was about where Titus's was. Now then, the Ark of the Covenant vanished out of this besieged city. Some people say it was taken to Mount Horeb. Some people say that Solomon's son, by the Queen of Sheba, snookered him into making a replica, and he traded. But the Shekinah glory didn't leave until about 586 BC. This man might have snookered Solomon and everybody else around, but he could not snooker the Shekinah glory. So that did not happen. Now then, the only place short of God blinding part of the Babylonian army and having his people, some of his people, take this out and hide it, was that it had to be hidden in the city or inside this siege wall. Okay? Now then, the city is being systematically excavated down underneath, the tunnels, the caves, and everything, with very scientific methods. Now then, I went to the Israeli archaeological authorities, including the gentleman I was speaking with. When my mouth said something my brain, shall we say, didn't go along with or had no idea about, and I explained how it had to be in one of these inside that siege wall, and I thought that it was there from my research. So they gave me a permit based on that. And we started digging. And as we dug, we found cutouts in the cliff face where 3 public signs related to the crucifixion were set up when a well-known criminal was to be crucified. Now, this arrangement I always thought was just for Christ. It was not. This is how the Romans did it. And they had captured Barabbas, who had stirred up a lot of trouble in the area, rebelled and tried to overthrow the government. He didn't have a lot of luck, but he tried it. And so he was sentenced to be crucified, and he was to be crucified in a very public manner. Now, some say on a hill far away. This is a hill far away. It's a little bit below the crest because they made a quarry through here. But it's still on Mount Moriah. Now then, they always crucified people right along by the side of a very busy road where the most people would see the crucified, because it was meant to intimidate anybody that would be thinking about trying something. And they put the language or the name of the person and what they were accused of in the chief local languages. In Jerusalem, it was Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, or Roman. And there's 3 cutouts there. Now then, in other cities, they put up whatever languages were used there, but it was always Roman, was one of those languages. Now then, we, as we excavated down the escarpment, found these cutouts. The wall that was on the outside away from the cliff face got so high and teetery that we decided to sink a shaft down to see what strata we would find. We did this, and we turned the samples in appropriately. We did carbon-14 dating on the charred wood that we found at different levels. We turned in the mortars and pestles, and the last one I handed in, they said this is 10,000 years old. Jebusite, of course. But anyway, when we got down to the bottom, we came back up to where this thing, the ledge of the cliff, it had been cut down into. Anyway, the Roman level was at the top of this thing, and everything below that was pre-Roman. So we went along in a horizontal shaft along the cliff face, carefully documenting everything as we went. Any archaeologist that doesn't do this is a criminal, because people deserve to know what happened here and what was found. Not some made-up story, not some things that were carried in from another dig and put here so they can say, well, we found this here, this proves such and such. There's a lot of that goes on. And in school, they teach you You do not go out and dig to see what is there. You decide what is there, and then you see to it that that's what you find. See, this is what they teach you in school. So anyway, we went along this wall at the Roman level. We found Roman coins, we found Roman glass, we found Roman pottery, all this stuff. We turned all of this in. It's in boxes over in the basement, our storage area at the Rockefeller Museum. Unless somebody came along and decided it wasn't any good and they had too much of that sort of thing anyway. Now then, as we went along, I found this cutout rock. And I thought, man, that's unusual. So I picked the thing up and I noticed that there was a depression under there. So I started digging carefully down through there, and it was just some debris. But it was a cross hole filled with debris. And apparently, when these cross holes were not in use for crucifixion, they had plugs that they put in them so horses or people walking by wouldn't break a leg, and so they wouldn't fill up, and they'd have to clean them out every time they were going to use them. So anyway, I was told to put that in a safe place, which I did. And it's still in a safe place. But anyway, it dawned upon me that this had to be where Christ was crucified, because this was 12 feet below these cutouts in the cliff face, and it was at the Roman level, because we found coins of Tiberius and some others. We know that that was open to the public for several years, including the point in time when Christ was crucified. Now then, as we were working there, we noticed a crack in the cliff right by the left side of where this cross hole was. Well, that didn't mean a lot, because this thing has been fractured considerably, and if you'll look along this escarpment, there's a lot of cracks in there. And the Bible says that when Christ died, there was an earthquake and the rocks were rent. Okay? Now then, today I know that that crack occurred at that moment in time. Then I didn't know that. What was I excavating for? What was I looking for? What was my permit about? It was to see if the Ark of the Covenant had been hidden in this escarpment. And I had people that I had to report to periodically. Now then, I was running out of money, and it was time to go home, and I prayed, Lord, what shall I do? And I was impressed to break right through the cliff face. And that seemed very ignorant to me. So I kept looking around, and I found some very old buildings, old foundations, old altar stones, which I left in place, as any good archaeologist will do. And when we got ready to go, the day before we were to fly out, my oldest son, it was his turn down in the hole, and we were passing our tools out to store them. And he said, Dad, you always pray about things. Why haven't you prayed about this so you'll know where to dig? And I said, I have. And he says, well, what happened? And I said, I was impressed to break through this wall. Like, you know, that settles that. He said, well, why don't you do it? You've done dumber things than that before. So I said, well, okay. So I had him holler up at my youngest son, pass the tools back down. So anyway, here this crack was in the cliff face that went right by the left side of the wall. I decided if I had made my chisel crack over here, that I could just pop this out. So then I'd have a nice piece that I could put back and wouldn't damage anything. And so we did this, and we popped this out. And way back in the little, back into that crack was a dark hole about like this. Well, I said, give me the flashlight. So I shined it back in there, and here was this cave chamber. Well, I thought the Ark of the Covenant has got to be sitting right back there, and I went off into Never Never Land. I mean, goosebumps, swimmy head, and the whole bit. So we quickly enlarged the hole and got in. Well, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't sitting there. So I worked and worked, and poked around in this little hole and that little hole and followed this erosion path through the limestone. Finally, the 6th of January, 1982, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something else the archaeologist always does. When you enter a chamber where you think something might be, you look at your watch and you make a note of that. It may be important. If you don't find anything in there, you can forget about it. But you should look in case. So I did that. I went in there. Nothing but rocks. Now then, ordinarily I would have crawled right back out of that place, but my sons had gotten double pneumonia, walking pneumonia. They were running fevers of about 104. So was I. But anyway, I sent them home, and I decided that I was either going to find that this trip or die in the hole. I really did. That's not very bright, but when you're sick enough, it seemed very logical to me. And so anyway, I got this little Arab guy. He was just about so big, and he was marvelous at getting into places and shining the light around so I could see if they were empty or if they had anything in there. And so we went along like this, and we came to a little hole where the water had eroded a bit through there, and there was a stalactite hanging right down over the hole. So I took my hammer and I carefully tapped it at the base and laid it aside so we would have that for future reference if necessary. And then I made the hole big enough for him to get in. And this is the way we had been working. So he crawls in there, and I start to hand the light back in there to him. Here he came out terrified, absolutely terrified. And if I hadn't got out of his way, I honestly believe he'd have taken me apart getting out. He was mindless terror. That made me suspect there was something special in there. So he said, "What's in there? What's in there? I'm not going back in there." Well, that was fine by me, but I made the hole big enough so I could get in there, and that is the only reason that I looked in that cave, because it looked very unpromising. So I crawled around on these rocks. The place was full of them, about 18 inches of clearance to the ceiling. And I shined my light down through the little openings down through the rocks. I saw a spot of gold here, and I saw a spot of gold there, and I saw a spot of gold there, and my heart started pounding like you wouldn't believe. And I started taking these rocks and sticking them here, there, and everywhere. I actually ended up with rocks behind my shoulders back here. And here was a gold veneered table. I thought, that's the table of showbread. Later, I found out by reading the book of Samuel a little more carefully that Solomon made 10 more of them, besides the one that Moses had Bezalel make out in the wilderness. So now I don't know if that was the copy or the real thing. At that point in time, we didn't know that. Well, I happened to notice this stone box right in front of me, and the lid cracked right here. Well, I thought there's got to be something special in this box. And so I kind of looked up to see what I could do to get rid of some more rocks, and I saw some brown, dark brown stuff. And I looked on up the wall, and here it had come through a crack. And down the wall, and on that broken area of that lid. Suddenly, it all came together. The cutouts, the cross hole, the crack, the Ark of the Covenant, and Christ's blood on the mercy seat. 45 minutes later, I came to enough that I carefully put everything back, crawled out of there, sealed up the hole. Now, I can't get anything out of there but small objects, okay? But we have been cutting a large shaft down that's big enough to bring these things out. What they had done was to carry this stuff in there, lay animal skins over it, and then wood over that, and then fill it full of stone. Why they did that, I do not know. I can understand the animal skins, I can understand the wood, but why the stones? So anyway, the significance of that is this. In Psalm 77:13 it says, "Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary." Now see, God doesn't just say things to fill up a book. We might, if we're writing a book, say a few things just to fill up a page or another paragraph. He does not. His way is in the sanctuary. On the Day of Atonement, when the goat that represented Christ as the sin bearer, all of the sins that had accumulated in the sanctuary for that entire year were figuratively transferred to its head by the high priest. That animal was killed, its blood was taken into the most holy place and sprinkled on the mercy seat. The thought had never entered my mind, people. But when I saw that, I knew it could be no other way. But that Christ's blood had to go on that mercy seat. So type met anatype. And it's not that many feet from where you're sitting today. Now then, you have seen Noah's Ark. How many of you here think that you have seen Noah's Ark? Okay. And I know that y'all are not goofy and you're not snookerable, if you please. Everything that is in the Old Testament happened. After you leave here, we'll show you the crossing site and a column that Solomon set up with an inscription on it. The Egyptians chiseled that inscription off, or it eroded away after the stone fell into the water, into the surf. But on the Saudi Arabian side, there is another column that has the inscription intact. Out to Jabal el-Lawz in Saudi Arabia is a big, solid, one stone altar, 12 big pillars of stone, thousands of little stone circles with a common courtyard closely associated with the migration of the Habiru, pottery, and a white marble shrine dedicated to the mountain of God by King Solomon and inscribed in archaic Hebrew or Phoenician script. So anyway, God has done all of these things, and He has done it in a manner, as soon as these are all documented and presented to the world, everybody is going to know that the flood is not a myth. The crossing of the Red Sea is not a myth. We have found horses' skeletons, people's skeletons, 18th dynasty chariot parts. If you haven't seen them, we have them on video so you can see them. But all of this is real, and Christ is real, and His blood is on the mercy seat within a stone's throw of where you sit today. I don't know about you, but it's wonderful to know that God has done all of this for us, and it's wonderful that He has left enough evidence around to convince anybody that will be convinced. Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Did you get a chance to look in that stone box with a crack in it?
We have been doing some work since, but this I have been ordered to keep my mouth shut about. You see, I exist in a very special situation. I can share this with you, and people that believe the Bible know that it had to be that way. They have no problem accepting this. People that don't think I'm one of the biggest liars that ever hit the street. Well, I can live with that. But I know this, that when it is God's time, in Ephesians 1:10, it said, "In the dispensation of fullness of time, God subdued all things unto Himself through Christ Jesus." And in Matthew 24, it said, "When the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth His Son." This simply says that God has a time schedule and it will happen at that time. It will not happen before, nor after, but exactly at that time. So I can rest in peace. This doesn't mean I go home and just wait for God to tap me on the shoulder and say, go do something. I keep trying the knob because I'm very anxious, you see. But anyway, it will all come about in a manner that the whole world will see the gospel, God's last warning to planet Earth. And then those that see the truth and love that truth and cherish that truth can go to the Father in the name of the Son, and by the Son's blood receive cleansing from that law under which we are all condemned to death. And not only can they receive forgiveness, but we can receive rehabilitation. Let's face it, folks, we are not nice people. In our minds are all kinds of things. Thievery, lies, and it could go on and on. Only God can write His law upon the fleshy tables of our heart and change our motivation so that we want to love and help our fellow men instead of taking advantage of them. But in Christ, who died, here we can receive all that we need for eternal life with Him. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. And again, I never say anything to anybody unless they ask. The reason is, the Bible says you should be able to give a reason for the hope that is within you to them that ask. If a person is ready to learn something of God, He will have them ask. And He will send them to somebody.
Water came down where Moses struck the rock. It rolls right down there. And no, I'm not getting any closer to the edge there. It goes on down to, it goes right on down. Now, you see the rock that the boy with the blue cap is standing on? All right, that acted as a baffle. Water coming down real fast off of the mountain. We pass by them so fast it's hard to dip and get anything out of it. Well, what this did was, you can tell that it's not natural for that particular stone to be there. Normally it would have tumbled on down the way there, but it's put there to slow the water down and create a pool so they can then dip their water out of the pool. And it rolls right on down and goes right on out to the desert. Here's one of the best probably pictures where the water comes down right on down, and then you see that that's not natural for that rock to be there. It would have normally kept right on going, but the rock slows it down. And here's a close-up. There's the rock. There's where the water runs on down. Speaking of running on down, I've got two. They're leaving. You can tell a lot of water has run over that. Notice that up above, where the water come out, where just rainwater was, it's not been rubbed smooth there. You can see that rock right there? Now see how smooth or rough that is? And then as we come on down right there, where the water begins to hit, it's nice and smooth. You can even see the indentation there. It's all nice and smooth. Water did that. A lot. See how it's hollowed this out? All this is nice and smooth. Again, up above it, it's all rough and it's not been washed out. But right here, a lot of water did that. Rinsed all the convincing evidence. This is what it would look like if it's just regular rain runoff, and that's all real rough. There's no rocks dug out. See, there's a lava flow. But again, if you look out over there, deep caverns have been run into those rocks. A lot of water's flowed there. And then it came down and hit here and went on out into the desert.
Are working on in trying to reproduce the things that are mentioned in the Bible is giantism in human beings, and of course, if there were giant men, it follows that there were giant animals, and vice versa. Now, in Australia, where Dr. Roberts comes from, they have found wombats that stand 8 feet at the shoulders. They're 8 feet tall. At the present time, they're about 18 to 24 inches tall. They have found orangutan skeletons that are 14 feet tall. And they have found giant sloths, giant cave bears, all kinds of giant animals. Now then, one thing is missing in all of this that they have found, and that's kangaroos. Nobody has ever found and identified a giant kangaroo, but yet they have found thousands of giant dinosaurs, Allosaurus, T-Rex, and all of these. Now, if you will look carefully at the skeletons of these dinosaurs, you'll find that they are identical to the skeleton of the kangaroo. They have the massive legs, thighs, strong tail, and all of that, and they have the small arms. Now, the conclusion that you cannot escape reaching is that either kangaroos are a post-flood creation, or their skeletons are out there among all of the other skeletons of the animals that died during the flood. So what we have here is a misidentification of these animals. It's quite simple in these bone deposits to, shall we say, choose to connect these bones in manners that they were never connected in a living animal. The two men that led out in finding dinosaurs for the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Philadelphia, shall we say, they got a large bonus if they came up with some real spectacular animal. One of them took some extra bones that he had that he couldn't find the rest of the parts to. He took them over to his opponent or his competitor's area and kind of, buried them. And the guy found them, put them together, and named them something. I forget what it is. But later, the other fellow told him exactly where they came from, gave him photographs of the disarticulated bones, in other words, the loose bones. But that critter is still in the museum in Philadelphia, and it's still named, and it's still spoken of as an actual animal. Now then, there have been few human giant skeletons found that have been identified as such. There's some. They have found molar teeth, human molar teeth that are 6 times larger than normal. And so anyway, one of the things we have been praying about and asking God to help us find is a giant human skeleton. Now, I know in this group here we have folks of different opinions, and I don't have any problem with that. I know this, that a lot of this stuff, including Noah's Ark, you can get to heaven without knowing anything about it at all. Okay? What we need to know is that we are under a death penalty because we are habitual sinners. But in the name of Christ and in His blood, we can go to the Father and ask for forgiveness and rehabilitation, and He will accomplish that for us. That gets you salvation. These other things, however, can be very effective in getting people's attention. There's over 5 billion people on planet Earth, and most have no idea of the plan of salvation, no idea of the true God, no idea of Christ. How on earth can these people be approached? How can you get their attention? How can you get them to listen? What do you say to them if you can get them to listen? Some things you can take a shot in the dark at, but somebody's eternal life you had better not take a shot in the dark at. Okay? So God has preserved the things that you're going to see many of on this trip to get the world's attention. In Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 19 through 21, he says that I will draw all of the Gentiles unto me. These are unbelievers. And he quotes them. He says, they will say, surely our fathers inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein there is no profit, and have made gods unto themselves that are not gods. It's going to take something pretty spectacular to get people to admit that. I mean, put yourself in these folks' place. We're very reluctant just to say, I'm wrong, I made a mistake. That doesn't come easy, but here these people are freely admitting that their parents had been deceived and had passed it on to them. So God is going to do something very spectacular, and we're told in the 2nd chapter of Joel that he'll pour out his Spirit without measure upon all flesh. Now, Peter said that this thing that was spoken of by Joel is fulfilled today. However, the Holy Spirit was poured out on those that had been baptized and upon whom the apostles' hands were laid. In Joel it says, all flesh. We are coming upon a period of time when God's Holy Spirit is going to be poured out upon all flesh, just simply as it says. And everybody is going to be made aware of the truth. Now then, once that is done, it's up to those individuals. If they have habits in their lives, if they have projects, all these things that they are unwilling to let go and to love the truth when it comes along, then it says that God gives them over to the reprobate mind, who of course is Satan, and we're told that he will do signs and lying wonders, in so much that if it were possible he would deceive the very elect. So anyway, we're coming upon a very spectacular time in Earth's history. And folks, this whole experiment in sin is only going to happen one time in the history of the universe. It will never happen again. Nahum chapter 1 verse 9. Affliction shall not rise a second time. You and I are center stage in this experiment. And God is looking for people that will humbly and kindly share the truth with people that are lost. And I have said this a few times in my meetings, and I'll keep saying it, because we think we know God's truth doesn't make us any better than anybody else. As a matter of fact, it puts us under quite an obligation to share it with others. And again, we cannot share it carelessly. Only God knows who is ready to hear the truth, and only God knows what that person needs to hear. So, before we got you folks together, we prayed and asked God to have everybody on this trip that He wanted on this trip, and we asked Him to overrule in what was seen and what was said, so that everybody would get the full benefit of it. Now then, this is going to be very exciting. It's always exciting for me. When I think about these things, I get goose flesh. And tachycardia and all this stuff. It's very exciting. When all of this stuff hits the news, and it will, everybody is going to be looking for somebody that can tell them what this means. What is the significance of this? What's God trying to do? And they're going to come to you and ask you. But I want to make one point here, and that is, all of you that are parents, you would not send your child to somebody that you knew would deceive them. If you are willing to do that, then you're sick, desperately sick. God will not send an honest-hearted inquirer for His truth to somebody that is careless or indifferent as to how they answer these people's questions. He will send them to somebody that He can speak through to give these people what they know to be safe. So we need to lay our pride and a lot of times our preconceived ideas aside and let God work through us and in us to make us effective soul winners. So that is what this whole trip is all about. And every evening we'll take time to go over some subject. Tomorrow night we're going to talk about Noah's Ark. Dr. Roberts here is researching it. We have researched this. It's always good to have an honest second opinion. And Dr. Roberts is an honest individual, and shall we say he has an excellent turn of phrase. The way he states these things gets the point across quite effectively, in my opinion, a lot better than I can. So I'm sure that he's a godsend to this, and tomorrow night we'll give him a chance to share with you his research on this, and of course we will answer your questions on that. Okay, does anybody have any questions on these bones that you've seen? We found them in Nevada, in the USA. It makes it quite easy, or other than the distance factor, makes it quite easy to go dig them up and document them carefully, which is something that we have to do with everything that we do. Now, I will say that these bones are slightly atypical of what you see in human skeletons. But pre-flood human beings had a much higher nutrition level in their diet and this sort of thing. So it is not surprising that their bones were much more fully matured and developed than the ones we see today, several thousand years after creation, and about 4,700 years after the flood. But anyway, we'll work on this. Some of the folks here, Dr. Neiswanger has volunteered to help, and some other folks. So God has things He wants done, and He will use anybody that volunteers to let God use you as He wants to. We can't just come and say, well, God, I'll be quite happy to do this for you, but I won't do anything else, and I'm going to do it my way. If that's the attitude we approach Him with, He'll find somebody else that is of a different attitude. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What do you estimate the height of that person that had a finger bone that long?
Well, I took this to radiologists and orthopedic surgeons, and they said that it was either this thumb bone. Most of them thought it was the first joint of the first phalange here, or the thumb. Some of them thought it was the toe bone. But either way, it's a very large person, and their estimate is from 12 to 14 feet tall. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Herodotus' histories. In there, they found the tomb of one of the so-called heroes of the Trojan War, and he was 10 feet tall. In the Bible, Goliath is described as being approximately 12 feet tall. And Og, king of Bashan, his bedstead was 15 feet long. Now, that implies that he was a very large man, and as a matter of fact, we know he was. Sometimes I tease about it and say he might have been a normal-sized fellow that just invented the first king-size bed. But I don't think that's the case. So anyway, there is documentation about giantism in the animal kingdom and in the human kingdom. But for some reason, very few human skeletal parts have been published. And I think a very, shall we say, honest explanation of that is that the universities, museums, and all of this that do most of the excavations are, shall we say, they want you to believe that man evolved from a little protozoa and all this sort of thing. Now, it says that the wisdom of man is foolishness with God. Anybody that can honestly believe that as complicated an organism as human beings could evolve from anything, their brain hasn't evolved very far. And I say that in kindness, because they cannot possibly understand the complicated workings of one organ in the human body, or they would not be saying that, making that statement. So anyway, I am convinced that this is one of the things that God is going to present. We have a cave at En-Gedi in Israel and a permit to open it. And I believe that it's an Amorite giant burial cave. However, I'd much rather find the giant human skeleton in Nevada, get this thing done quick and easy, and then just go on to other things.
Can you tell us the circumstances under which you found this, and are there other bones of this size from that?
Okay. She asked the circumstances. Now, I had some Australian friends that we met in Egypt. Very nice lads, 3 guys, they were in their 20s. And we met them in the Turkish Airlines office in Cairo. Fell into conversation with them. And, you know, you ask, what are you doing here? Only you do it politely, and they ask you, what are you doing here? So the net result was that they were on a year's holiday, which is a very popular concept after one gets out of school in Australia, and probably a good idea. And we were doing archaeological research, so we told them we were going out to Noah's Ark. Well, they had a good laugh about that, but they said we'd be glad to go help them. And I told them we'd pick up their expenses, and that made them gladder. So they said, you know, we don't believe any of this. Anyway, after we had gone out and showed them the things that you're going to see tomorrow, and they went with us to Israel after that, and we showed them some other things over there. As time progressed, their, shall we say, their conviction that none of this was true began to be shaken. And one day, while we were waiting on our permit to get back into the Ark of the Covenant excavation, now somebody had stolen an artifact, and everybody in the antiquities department got done something with. Most of them, when they wouldn't face the emotion, they just resigned or retired, or that sort of thing. So we were looking at all new faces in there, where we had been used to working with people we knew, and I had to go in and talk to a 3-star general about getting back into my excavation. And he says, well, we'll think about that and let you know. 3 weeks went by. Well, we went swimming down to the Mediterranean Sea. It was cold, and of course I have a little extra padding, so I didn't get cold as fast as these Australian lads. But they got out of the water, and I was starting to come in, hit my foot on something, and ducked under the water and looked down to see what it was, and it was a rounded stone. Well, I thought that was an unusual looking stone, so I started digging in the sand and uncovered a big stone pot. Well, I hollered at these fellows, they came back in, And we were all trying to uncover this pot. Finally, they kind of pushed me out of the way and said, "Old man, if you'll move out of the way, we'll get this thing uncovered." So I moved back into deeper water, and while they were digging and fighting with that sand, I found another pot. And I went over a few paces and found another. It turned out that there was just hundreds of those things out there in a stone pavement. Well, we pulled the top out of one of these, found human skeletal remains, found knives, beads, and other objects that were early Canaanite. Well, I photographed this. I had underwater cameras, got them developed, took them to the antiquities department. It blew their socks off. They went down, stretched ropes all around the beach area there, and they said they were going to put a, what do you call those deals? A wall, at least a retainer wall out around this whole area, pump the water out, and excavate it and restore it. They were thrilled to death. And I got my permit. So right about then, these Australian lads said, "Okay, we believe you now. We believe all of it. But we know how you did it. You just fell over." And that's about what has happened on all of this stuff, to be perfectly honest. But that's the way God does things. He does it in a manner that no human being can take credit for it. Because no human being is of the frame of mind to, shall we say, we all tend to get to over-exaggerate our importance if we think we actually did something. Well, I don't suffer from the illusion that I've actually done something. So anyway, I forget something happened to me the other day, and somebody said, "Well, that's just to keep you humble." And I, in fun, I said, "Well, look, that was the one thing I could be proud of, was my humility." But anyway, God knows how to keep us from getting crazy and losing our way. He knows exactly how to go about it. We don't, and he knows exactly how to